One.
Hello and welcome to Low Volume Small Form Factor.net's podcast. My name is Joshua Ramirez and I slept in a little bit today.
A little
Just
bit.
a little bit.
Just a little
Just a
bit.
little bit. But I'm here. I'm very awake and we have so much to talk about. Holy cow. We had to push a week from our previously scheduled time for this episode, but it looks like that was well worth doing. Uh, just to get us started, I'll make sure everyone knows that we're all here. So, of course, there's myself, Josh Ramirez, aka Playful Phoenix. We also have John, aka Confucius. John, how have you been?
I'm tired. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I've
My
got to
bet.
go fix my mum's home theater PC today. So that'll be
Oh,
fun.
fun.
Which involves a 4-hour round trip driving.
Oh wow.
Oh my goodness! Wow,
That's a short drive in this country.
is it?
Yeah.
You live on an island.
Yeah, it's a pretty big island. The length of New Zealand is like the length of the eastern seaboard of the States.
Wow, I
Yeah.
had no idea. That's interesting. Okay. Well, we also have Abophobia, aka James, on. How are you, James?
Doing good. Just been busy getting ready for my trip. So,
That's
been,
right.
been-
When do you leave?
um, let's see. I'll be leaving. I'll start. Let's see. I'll be driving the 18th. So I won't make it for the next podcast, and then I'll be going to Colorado visit some family. Then I'll be flying from Salt Lake City. And the flight I think is on the 24th. So it'll be interesting. I get to go from Salt Lake City to San Francisco to Vancouver, then finally to Tokyo. So be a couple stops in there.
That's
Yeah.
the scenic route.
Yeah. Well,
Scenic route.
like no, like so that the ticket for that just one way doing that route was about $1,200.
Mm.
So I could have got a ticket for like 600, but it would have been about a 65-hour trip.
Oh.
Ugh.
Yeah, with like
Ugh.
a 20-hour layover in like Hong Kong or whatever, depending on which one you do.
You
So
made
like,
the right call.
yeah, this one round trip from Salt Lake City all the way to Tokyo, even with all those stops, it's only like 16 hours.
That's not
So
bad.
it's like, oh, that's well worth it. Yeah.
Well, exciting, and we will wish you well on your way there. But for now, we have lots to talk about, and I guess we're just going to go ahead and go in order. And I think I guess it depends on the person, but I think some of the biggest news to me personally, but perhaps to the industry as a whole, is Ryzen, the release of Ryzen 7 to be specific. We have essentially the top tier of chips from AMD, utilizing the new Zen architecture and sort of the Ryzen generation, if you will. And a lot happened. So we already knew this was coming. This was pre-announced, but NDAs dropped. So a whole bunch of publications obviously had access to the 1800X, I believe, for the most part, which is the absolute highest tier of chips in the Ryzen 7 series. We also had just a lot of reviews and more information come out with respect to the platform as a whole. And now, for folks that aren't aware, the Ryzen 7 series is essentially a focus on 8-core chips, the 8-core 16-thread chips. And there are 3 that were a part of this series, the 1800X being essentially the highest performant one. Then I believe there's also 1700X and then a 1700. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Right. So what's interesting about these chips, other than the fact that they follow this new architecture, is the fact that their price points actually decidedly put them in the middle of the pack with respect to sort of Intel's pricing scheme across all the chips that they offer. So they are 8-core parts, but they top out in like the $500-ish range for the highest performance chip. And it's almost kind of hard to compare it against Intel insofar that Intel is sort of bifurcated their lineup right now. Like, it's different architectures depending on the core count and the platform that it's meant for. But needless to say, I mean, obviously we'll go through and talk about some of the reviews we saw, both of the Zen architecture broadly and of the 100x more specifically. But while it wasn't a perfect performance, the value provided by these chips is spectacular, especially when you're thinking about a whole host of workstation workloads. So I think for the most part, my reading of most of the reviews was generally positive. Like definitely some architectural decisions that had consequences where it's still in gaming context in single-threaded workflows, and then for specific workflows that rely on dedicated logic modules, AMD's decisions meant sort of trailing performance, but that in many other ways they had leading performance. So, what do you guys think? So I'll start with you, John, because I think you're probably the most excited of all of us.
You'd be surprised. I was one of the ones that was overly excited about Bulldozer and Pile Driver and whatnot.
Aww.
I was bitterly disappointed.
I'm so sorry.
I ended up running Steamroller for a bit anyway. Basically, the leaks and the information that we were given leading up to the launch was that this was more of a, I don't know how to put it. It wasn't quite targeted at the gaming group. It was more of a creative workstation kind of thing, which unfortunately all the industry, all the reviewers that they give the parts to are all focused on gaming. So it's the reviews that I've seen have been somewhat negative in that respect. How it doesn't compete with the 7700K and these games, this game, but it absolutely kicks ass in all these creativity applications. So it's interesting that they launched only the 8-core parts to start off with. I would have thought maybe launch a 6-core or 4-core with higher clock speeds to compete with the 7700K, because that is where they will be able to compete. Is they need the higher clock speeds basically. Value for money side of it, it's impressive. It's out of my budget, but it's impressive. Funks, one of our moderators, and I were chatting earlier about not just the price of the particular processors, but the entire platform cost, because the people who are going to be upgrading to Ryzen at this point are people who are either got a few generations old system or are building, well, basically they'll be building new systems. So they're going to have to buy the processor, the motherboard, and the memory. So got to look at the whole package versus like the 6900K they're comparing it to, and it's still twice the price, the whole platform. As if the motherboards were too expensive on the Ryzen side, it wouldn't make much sense, or if they were cheap on the X99 side, it wouldn't make much sense as well. But it kind of works out.
Yeah, the X99 platform is expensive.
It is. I think the cheapest motherboard available in New Zealand for the X99 platform is like 400 New Zealand dollars.
Oh my goodness.
Which works out to be about 300-ish US. It's micro ATX gigabyte unit. And
then like the 8-core X99 chips are what, $1,000 US dollars?
The 6900K is 1,700 New Zealand dollars.
Yeah, just blows away the Ryzen platform cost. Yeah. It's insane.
So how about you, James? What were your thoughts looking through some of these reviews?
Yeah, it looks really good. So 8-core 16-thread is pretty awesome. Because I'm lately I guess for quite a while now I've been running fairly high core count, thread count chips. Like I think I guess my first i7 was an i7 860. So that was the what's that? 1156. That was in 2009, I think, when that launched. And then I had another system with the Phenom 2X6, the original AMD 6-core, not hyper-threading or simultaneous multi-threading, actually, to be more generic. And then I had what did I have? Had an i7 4771, and then now I have a 5930K, so hyper-threading 6-core on the X99 platform, and then I'll be switching soon and probably selling the 5930K to a I forget the model number. It's some wacky one, but it's a 14 core Xeon, also for X99.
Show off. See, I went and got
Yep.
6 cores, 12 threads, and you had to outdo me.
Yeah, but the problem is like it's 2 gigahertz base and
Yeah.
3 gigahertz
Oh
boost, and
God.
I've never seen it hit 3. So, I've only the most I've ever seen it hit is 2.5 gigahertz. So,
It's not even close.
yeah. So yeah, it's 14 cores, and I mostly did it for the bragging rights. It's like, oh, I got 14 cores, hyper threading. But yeah, the single threaded performance is it's a bit lacking. Um, so in comparison, like the Ryzen chips here, even though they're not super competitive with like say Kaby Lake especially on single threaded, it's still, I mean, I mean, because I mean, yeah, you can argue it's not as performant as Kaby Lake, but I mean, like a lot of people are upgrading from like older systems where it's not as good as they could possibly get, but it's still better than what they have. Plus, oh, look at all these cores, There's 8 of them,
I get the
16
feeling.
threads too.
Yeah, I get the feeling a lot of the upgraders are going to be the Core 2 Duo or Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge level, or those who are still on their Venom X4s, X6s.
Yeah, I think a lot of yeah, I think we'll see a lot of bulldozer people upgrading.
No kidding.
Because I mean, there's a lot of people who, because I run into this at work, like a lot of people who either are AMD fanboys and now they have something they can actually like use that's competitive instead of just kind of having to just sigh and it's like, yeah, I know it's not very good. With Bulldozer.
Oh,
But then also there's a lot of people that I run into who, and I think I mentioned this in the forum thread. I see this all the time, especially the last 3 years or so. I keep running into this. Is people will like gamers will start out with a bulldozer system, and they buy it not because they are particularly fans of AMD. It's just like, oh, it's 8 cores for like $200. Like, isn't that a great deal? And then it's like, well, no. An i5, even an i3, so a hyper-threading dual core compared to the AMD FX whatever's 8 cores, um, for most gaming blows it away. And yeah, it's sad. I mean, there are a couple games that are like particularly multi-threaded where that's not true, but the vast majority of times for gaming, the like modern i3s outperform the 8-core FX series. So then what I would run into is people would buy these 8-core or the 6-core FX because like on paper it's like, oh, it's 6 cores for like a lot less than the equivalent Intel, and like, I mean, these are the people who like they're not like us. They don't spend all day reading benchmarks and reviews and stuff. They just go to Newegg or Amazon and they just see that core
8 is
for
bigger
core.
too.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Bigger
core
numbers.
for core,
Oh
the AMD is way cheaper. But what would happen is then they would get it and then they would use it and then they would realize that, hey, this doesn't really game like I thought it should for like 8 cores or 6 cores. And then they do some reading and it's like, oh, I should have went Intel. And then what happens is like a year or two later, when they've kind of got some money together, they upgrade, and what do you know? They switch to an Intel platform instead. So I feel that like now with Ryzen, you'll still get a lot of those kind of, I guess you could say, ignorant people who is like, oh, like 8 cores, 16 threads for like half the price of what Intel would charge you for an 8-core with 16 threads. That's amazing. And then they'll buy it, and then like it's not as good as Kaby Lake, just because of lower clocks, lower IPC for like non-heavily multi-threaded tasks, but it's not such a gap that I think they will just like immediately regret their decision and then turn around and plan for an Intel upgrade. So I think like not hemorrhaging these new users, like they did with the Bulldozer, I think will be a huge step up for AMD. Because then that way people they may not, I mean, it may not be as good as Kaby Lake, but at least it's not so bad or so behind that people just immediately want to switch. So they'll stick with it. And then like from all like AMD's already starting to hype up Ryzen too. Saying like I think where was it? Oh yeah, AMD did a Ask Me Anything on the AMD subreddit.
Yes, they did.
And yes, and then really good stuff there. Usually those type of things just turn into like marketing corporate speak with just like vague PR approved messages, which are completely boring. But this one had lots of good info. It was really detailed. And so Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD, was on there for a little bit. And then there were several, I guess, marketing people who actually knew what they were talking about. And yeah, they're already saying like, yeah, there's like several things we wanted in Ryzen that just didn't make the cut, either for like cost or power or transistor or time constraints. And so they apparently there's a lot of good stuff they've already gotten work planned for Ryzen 2. So that's really promising. Um Oh yeah, so Locomoto in the chat mentioned ECC. So a lot of the reviews, because like AMD hasn't really talked about ECC up to this point, like whether the Ryzen processors support it. Um, and so it's kind of like a question mark. And a lot of the reviewers were kind of speculating that possibly that would be a feature saved for the whatever they're going to call the server chips, whether they continue calling it Opteron or if they rebrand it. And then I think there's also talk of a possible Ryzen Pro series, which I guess would be kind of the equivalent of, say, like the high-end desktop Intel line. So like your
Right.
non-Xeon X99 chips, like kind of a competitor to that. Which, I mean, you would kind of think that Ryzen's already a competitor considering it's an 8-core, but it's like, so I'm not sure what else they would add to it other than maybe a more workstation-oriented chipset rather than X370. So like something equivalent, like kind of the difference between like say like Z270 versus X99. So maybe like kind of some other chipset, but
More
in
PCI
the
Express.
yeah, that'd be one big thing because like
one.
that's very lacking for like workstation users is that Ryzen's kind of I mean for gamers it's fine. X8 even if you're running dual GPU is more than enough. But for people running like workstation stuff where they need like a video card and then maybe another video card like for video rendering and stuff like that, and then maybe they want like a capture card and then like another like a high like a 10 gig network card. Like if you want all of that in one system, you start hurting for PCI Express lanes on the Ryzen platform currently. But yeah, real quick. So like the ECC was kind of a question mark, and then the AMA they're like, oh yeah, all the Ryzen chips have ECC. It's just up to the motherboard. It's like, oh, well that was easy. Why didn't you just say that before? So yeah, apparently yeah, ECC. It's like it's there. It's just up to the motherboard makers to kind of just validate it and include support for it in the BIOS. So yeah, hopefully we'll see ECC. And this is particularly for SFF. This is one thing that I really, really hope motherboard makers don't kind of like gouge us by only allowing ECC on like high-end workstation boards, because currently the only low-profile DDR4 sticks available is there's Crucial makes one that's ECC unbuffered. So I have some for my Xeon system I'm going to use, but like that's it. Like there is no consumer low profile DDR4, which just it sucks.
You mean
because
very
like
low
they were
profile?
yeah,
Since
that's
everyone
stupid.
changed the branding on it.
Yeah, so yeah, like low profile now is normal height, and then like regular height is like those stupid heat sinks. That's I hate that.
Yep.
And like, I mean, George can attest to this. Back in the DDR2 days, like, depending on like certain variants of DDR2, really, really, really needed a heatsink,
FB
and
dims.
really they needed fans too. So like that's where the whole like RAM heatsink and then the RAM cooling fans came from. That was back in like the DDR2 days and earlier. Since DDR3, with the emphasis on low power consumption, so like every iteration since, so like from DDR2 to DDR3, and then even within the generations, like the early days of DDR3 to like kind of the later versions of DDR3, the voltage kept dropping. So nowadays with DDR4, like the the power consumption and thus the heat output on modern RAM is like negligible. Like,
Yep.
these stupid heat sinks that are like make the RAM like twice as tall is completely unnecessary, and it's like just purely for aesthetics.
RGB.
And yeah, now we got RGB everything.
Which may
RGB
consume
RAM.
more energy than the damn memory.
Yeah. Which, I mean, if people want to do that, fine. But what drives me nuts is that's become like the normal, like the standard. And now, like, normal height RAM is now considered low profile RAM. So, anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, very low profile, as it's now called. Well, I guess technically it's called very low profile, actually. But,
VLP.
yeah, VLP. And then there's ULP, but I don't think there's really a difference. But yeah, so like it was somewhat readily available in DDR3, which is weird because like on DDR4, there's less power consumption, and I think I'm not sure what all the numbers are, but I believe most DDR4 is made on smaller process nodes as well. So like there's really, if anything, it should be easier to make DDR4 and VLP, but it's like non-existent, and I think it's because there's just not demand for it, because like all the stupid gaming nonsense with ridiculous heat sinks and RGBs and LEDs and all this has killed the demand for it, so just nobody makes it anymore. So anyway, so yeah, it does exist in ECC though, so that Ryzen supports ECC is awesome news.
Yeah,
So,
honestly surprising to me.
yeah.
You know, and maybe it's just because I'm used to the fact that this is something you have to pay Intel through the chipset and the processor itself, like 4 figures just to get.
Yes, yeah, because on Intel, like not only do you like X99, you think, oh, I'm spending like $1,000 on our processor, I can get ECC, right? Nope.
Nope.
You have to get a Xeon. So not only do you had to buy the more expensive X99 platform, you now also had to buy a Xeon. Luckily, you don't have to buy the server chipsets. Because like a lot of times, because I mean those are only really available on server motherboards, so now you miss a lot of like consumer features like being able to put your computer to sleep, for instance. So just like little niceties like that usually don't exist on server motherboards. So at least they're not. At least you can get.
Are there any other notable features of Ryzen that are worth bringing up? I mean, I would encourage folks.
Like to me, the core count for the price and then the ECC is awesome. I don't know, XFR and stuff, I'm not really too stoked on, since it doesn't seem like it's really that much of a difference, because I think Ryzen's currently power limited, or at least more like voltage limited if you kind of crank the clocks up too much higher. So I don't know.
Yeah, the overclocking headroom seemed to be pretty narrow.
Yeah, which, I mean, they pretty much did this with bulldozers, that in order to increase the performance, they increased the clocks, which on bulldozer kicked them in the butt because the power consumption and the heat output was so high, which here they've managed to keep it pretty tame. Like I think like Intel and AMD measure TDP differently, so I think the conclusion is that like they say 1800X is 95 watt TDP, and whereas I think Intel chips usually actual like power consumption usually comes in a little underrated TDP, I think here it's a little bit over, just because of the difference in methodology and stuff like that as far as how they calculate that figure. But it's still impressive compared to like the 220 watt FX 9350 or whatever.
Space heater.
So yeah, no kidding.
I can't believe
yeah,
like
like
that.
I think like basically like the 1800X is like just its stock clock, and then whatever XFR clock it hits is basically like kind of already right at the inflection point where the voltage just like goes crazy, like the voltage required to hit anything higher. So I don't know, it's a cool idea in theory. I don't think there's really enough overhead on the chips to really make it that interesting. So like I don't know, I don't really care. XFR, I think on Ryzen 2, once like the process node has kind of been ironed out and they can kind of get more out of it, will be more interesting. But as it is now, other features, I don't know. I didn't really see. I mean, there really isn't that much that was really that interesting to me. Because like, I mean, the whole like the neural network and all that stuff is kind of neat, but it's like, I don't know.
They're just
Um,
giving a fancy label to traditional branch prediction, and like Intel's is fantastic at this, by the way. So this was an area where they needed even more catching up to do. But they did
yeah.
do some interesting work. They shortened the pipeline for branch prediction, such that if they create a prediction in flight and it's incorrect, it actually is a lot. It's fewer cycles are lost as they have to flush that prediction out and then continue to do calculations. So, like they did do a lot of interesting work there, and it is vastly improved. One other interesting thing that was brought up in the forum, as well as actually within our internal chat, was the fact that the behavior of the branch predictor is such that for certain workloads, as you're doing them repetitively, that will alter how often it predicts correctly, and it'll actually learn in a sense from that. So the behavior of it is sort of, that's where you can sort of, okay, well, neural network, like I get what they're saying, like it's understanding probabilistically that with certain tasks, things are with a higher frequency are happening, and it's learning that on the fly. So for certain benchmarks, you'll notice how like it performs a little better each time, and that's just because the branch prediction is improving because it's noticing the fact that, hey, it's just the same task over and over again. I can act
Hope you cut out there.
faster, and I can fill. Oh no, really?
Yeah, just a little bit. But yeah, like one thing with the neural network and stuff though that people need to be aware of is this is not a long-term learning type of thing. This isn't where like it analyzes everything you do and like is constantly iterating and improving its performance. So this is just kind of like this is just a short-term thing. So like as it's running a certain tasks, if it notices certain patterns, it can like increase the efficiency of that it processes it. But then as soon as it's done with that task, it kind of has to clear out all that learning and then like redo it for the next task. So this isn't it's not like it's like the longer you use it, the better it gets, and just kind of it's constantly improving. That's not how that works. This is just kind of a limited just for like whatever process it's currently working on.
Yep, it's got a cache. Caches are flushed out frequently. It is very much just based on the current workload. If you sustain that for a period of time, and it tends to have repetitive functions or calculations, it can be faster executing them because of the fact that the branch predictor will notice this, and it will do a better job of essentially keeping the cores fed. So anticipating what it'll be doing next and starting it, and then learning that it was correct. So before those instructions were even fetched, it already began executing them. So, but it's interesting technology. I mean, you really can, to AMD's credit, like they've done a very good job of, at least at a high level, walking through pretty much every element of the architecture of Zen. They've walked through kind of the reasoning for a lot of the decisions driving the way it's set up now. And a lot of it's just kind of plain interesting and cool. I mean, maybe it goes over my head, but even so, it's been kind of a neat exercise. There's lots of documentation, obviously lots of discussion recently as AMD's been sharing all these details, and we finally have some hardware in front of us, and you can actually go ahead and buy it now. But for the curious, like, there are many websites that have gone really into the weeds on this, if that's your thing. So I'd encourage you to look around. All right, is there anything else per Vega Ryzen that we would like to discuss before we move on to the next architecture that AMD is working on? I feel like we covered the gamut.
Yeah.
All right, then in which case we shall forge forward into the other architecture that AMD is working on, which is, of course, Vega. Now, they did have an event relatively recently with respect to Vega. Needless to say, this is something that is on the horizon, but isn't, we're not in the thick of, and it's not immediately in front of us, as is the case for Ryzen. And to that end, I think there's just a lot more ambiguity. A few of you, did either of you watch the event that they had recently?
No.
About Vega?
I was watching. I was trying to catch it at work, but as soon as I realized that we weren't really going to see any like this isn't going to like here's the cards, here's how they perform. It was more like a high level because I mean this was at GDC, the Game Developer Conference. So
Yes.
like it became obvious pretty quickly that like they're at GDC and this presentation is aimed at the game developers in attendance, even though they kind of hyped it up that that there would be more to it, but that didn't turn out to be the case. So like we were kind of busy, so I ended up just turning it off and just doing other things. But yeah, yeah. I mean, from what I saw and then reading the summaries afterwards, I mean, there's some interesting technology talked about, but I mean, basically we learned nothing really new about the cards themselves. Like nothing like TDP or like if we're going to see like form factors or anything like that, like none of that was revealed. So so I don't know. I think AMD, I don't think they actively encouraged it, but they sure didn't go out of their way to set the bar straight on like leading up to the event, like what exactly would be discussed. So I don't know. I was a bit disappointed, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously staggered releases of these products, so there's not much AMD can do, and we have so much coming in with respect not only to, of course, Ryzen, which is all fun and great and interesting, but Nvidia, Nvidia's own releases are staggered against AMD's, and similar to what has been the case in the CPU space, I think in the GPU space, there's still that mentality that like Nvidia is the one that's sort of leading the market, and AMD is the one that's kind of trying to catch up. And that's particularly true at the highest end, truly flagship tier graphics, which Nvidia just released the newest one, right? They just released the 1080 Ti, or I call it the 1080 Ti, but you guys insult me every time I do that. So.
Before we head away from Vega, I've got a point about Vega.
No. I was just saying.
Like, it kind of sounded like you're heading towards the next topic.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Not plenty more to talk about, but more to talk about. Go ahead.
The whole Vega thing, it's a couple of our staff have mentioned that the presentation was a little bit rushed in a way, so it's almost like they cancelled what they were going to show just because of what Nvidia did with their scheduling of the 1080 Ti launch. But apart from that, the part of the Vega architecture that really interested me is the HBCC, which is their new memory kind of architecture, where not only will the card have direct access to the onboard VRAM, it'll also have access to the system memory, solid state drives, any other cache in the system, basically any other memory in the system, to kind of, what's the word for it, if it needs more memory, it can use this memory for its own use. And in a way that kind of leads onto the whole like AMD Raven Ridge platform, where the rumor is that there'll be HBM on the actual package with the APUs. So I'm wondering
that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we're getting to the point where it's almost in a complete system on the chip with 2 gig or 4 gig of memory shared between CPU and GPU, and you just add extra memory that's shared between both in real time, which would be awesome.
Like, that's the whole heterogeneous compute which they've been pushing for a while, and
they haven't quite got there yet.
The problem is that it's so software dependent. Like, without software to take advantage of it, it's basically useless.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking HBCC might be that step where they're actually just making the hardware do it for the software, because the code, as we see with multiple cores, for example, the coders aren't coding for it because they're lazy, so force the hardware to do it to make it work.
Yeah, so it's interesting, but I will remain skeptical until we see software that actually uses it.
I think they were showing demos at the launch, at the event, that was showing the effect of HBCC, but I'm not sure if it was a specific game that is coded for it or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And then the other thing I heard, just to go back to the event for a sec, was just that the event was just not good. Like
Oh
it just
yeah.
wasn't a good presentation.
Mm.
Like I think corny, well not corny, but like just word was the word, maybe.
Well,
I
that's
didn't
kind
watch
of
it. I'm
par
not
for the
planning on
course
watching
for
it at this
AMD
point, but
though. I mean, I mean,
oh, I
it's
mean
just
that may be true, but don't be too mean.
yeah. I mean, well, because I mean, flashy presentation is. I mean, they make good well, okay, maybe not, but not all the time, but they make usually make good products. But it's just, I mean, presentation is just kind of its whole. It's like a whole nother level. I mean, like Apple is masters of it, um, which is all well and good. AMD just, I don't know. It, I guess it's kind of interesting because it's like it is interesting. I guess kind of like Elon Musk is I find it more genuine to see like engineers on stage who aren't necessarily the most like charismatic public speakers, but they actually know what they're talking about.
I think that's
Like
what AMD
for
does.
yeah, so like they had Raja on stage, and yeah, he definitely knows what he's talking about. And he's not too bad of a presenter,
No, I don't think so.
um, but yeah, just like the whole event overall, definitely wasn't like and I guess it's also kind of partly the venue. I mean, it's the game developer conference, so they're talking to game developers. So this isn't I mean, they did kind of hype it up maybe more than was warranted, but I mean, in the end though, it's not really like a big flashy like product launch. Because yeah, they just talked high level architectural stuff. There wasn't any like they talked about Vega, which we learned that Vega will now be called Vega. So that's interesting, I guess. Um, but other than that, like nothing, like no video cards were launched at this event. So I guess it kind of makes sense that maybe they didn't put a whole lot of effort into making it the most polished presentation ever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to what the goal was. Like I guess the goal wasn't really to like super pump everyone up. It may be that the goal was kind of boring, and that's why for consumers it was really boring, and it was more essentially just looking at it at face value in the purest sense, and to say, okay, well, they just wanted to tell as much as they could to developers about expectation and level setting in terms of how the architecture works. In anticipation of the fact that as they know more, they'll have a more complete sense, and have a better sense, further ahead of time of like, this is what the implications of Vega are going to be to me as I'm thinking about users actually using this technology and how to ensure that my games run properly on it. So maybe that's not what like folks like us were looking for, and that led to a lot of the disappointment and criticism of the fact that this was kind of an awkwardly run event. But it could just be that given the timeline on this, that's just where they're at, and that's all that they could really do, or all they felt comfortable doing at that point. So anything else here?
Not on
Not
Vega.
really.
Yeah. All right. Well, in which case, now, John, I shall move to the more interesting, exciting implications
Oh,
to
off you go
me and
then.
my build, let alone to customers. Oh, I could talk on and on. I think there was a lot of interesting things that came out, not just in terms of the product itself, but in terms of like the street and other implications. So, in a very similar time frame, just before GC, we learned, Nvidia shared a little announcement. Hey, we have a product that might be interesting to you, and I think everyone knew that it was going to be the 1080 Ti. I think we also all knew that it was going to use the same chip as the current version of the Titan. But what we didn't really know was what the specific implementation was going to look like. So what modifications would they make? Would they be disabling things? How would the clock speed compare? B, maybe what memory technology, what the speed of that would be? And then C, naturally, the price, right? I think the price was where a lot of folks, myself included, were a little bit nervous, just because, with the current generation of graphics cards, they've pushed the price upward. Even if you get like, MSRP, which is kind of hard to find, but B, especially if you go with the Founders Edition reference version, right, which you now have to pay a premium on to get those shrouds. So, They did a few interesting things here. So in terms of the actual card itself, right? So it does rely on the same core. It's GP102, I think is what it is. Is that correct, guys?
I believe so. Yeah,
Sounds about
Locomotive
right.
Yeah.
says it is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, if I'm recalling correctly, it's GP102, which is the same as the Titan. And so they've disabled certain elements of it, right? So let's see here. One of the memory controllers is disabled, so the pathway for the memory is a little awkward, right? Because normally it would have been, geez, like 374. Now it's 352. They also disabled one of the. They like disabled one of everything. So are one of the SMs disabled?
No, like all the cores are present. Or all the cores are present that are also present in the Titan X Pascal.
Oh,
But
right, which itself had it disabled. That's right.
yes,
Okay.
so it's not fully unlocked. So in that sense, yeah, it's not a fully unlocked GP102, but neither is the Titan that it's kind of derived from. Um, so like in comparison to the Titan, then or the Titan X Pascal, the only thing that's disabled is like one of the ROPs for the memory. But other
Correct.
than
One of the
that,
memory
it's
controllers.
yeah.
Yeah. So what's funny is that there are 12 of these in parallel that disabled one. So one of the outcomes of this is the fact that it has sort of an unusual quantity of memory, right? 11 gigabytes of memory.
Yeah.
But you know, the
It's
other
gonna
thing they
bug me
did.
the entire life of this card.
I think there's been speculation that they could have done 12, but it would have been the whole 3.5 gig thing again, where like it's 11 full speed RAM and then like another gigabyte of like, I mean, people call it slow. It's slow compared to like on the GTX, was it the 970? It's slow compared to the regular, like the full speed RAM, but it's still way faster than system memory. So
Yeah.
it's
Oh
not like
gosh,
it's like
yes.
useless. I mean, though that's the whole reason they did it that way. It's not as good, but it's still better than system RAM. And
Right.
I'm wondering if maybe they could have done the same thing here, but they purposely chose not to because of the marketing, uh, that the bad marketing that would cause, where people
And
would say they would
Flagship
and if we're
rather
card
than
being okay,
that's been gimped.
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and if we're being pragmatic about it, like 11 gigabytes of memory, I mean, who the hell's gonna need that? Like, you know,
VR 4K.
who's gonna? Well, no, but like at that point, the bottleneck is not going to be that, right? I mean, you're going to if you're needing 11 gigabytes of VRAM, right? One GTX 1080 Ti is not enough. In which case, you have at least 22 gigabytes. You know, like this is going to affect 1% of the 1% of the 1%. And the other thing too is that they also compensated by increasing the frequency of the card as well as the speed of the memory. So there's 11 gigabytes of memory in terms of like physical size of it, but the speed of the memory is also 11. It's 11 gigabits per second, which is faster than the Titan, which I thought was set at 10, if I'm recalling correctly.
I don't think so.
No, is that one 11 as well?
No, I mean it is faster. I think you're right. It's like 11 gigahertz and then like 10 or 10 point something gigahertz for the Titan.
Follow. Okay, I follow you. Or well, Locomotive saying in the chat, it doesn't matter. It's faster. It's faster. It's better. It's cooler. It's great. So we have all of this, right? And this. Okay, they've done an interesting and I would say good enough job of like demonstrating the fact that hey, this is significantly faster than a 1080 Ti. It relies on a different chip. They haven't really disabled much, and okay, it's got a kind of weird number for the memory, but like clearly there's a division here between it and the 1080 Ti from a performance perspective, right? So that, and there are a few other things too. I mean, one of the things that, honestly, I'll admit, one of the things I was most excited about with this card is the fact that they finally got rid of DVI.
Yes.
And so it has 3 DisplayPort ports and an HDMI. I personally would like 4 DisplayPort because DisplayPort can be passively converted into HDMI, but that's beside the point. But obviously the benefit here is that if you want to water cool it, you can put a single slot cooler and it'll be supported without any sweat because it's not as if the PC, it's not as if the I/O is two PCI slots tall.
Yeah. And I think the most important thing is like, I mean, previous generations like that's happened, but I think I was reading somewhere this is the first time that's happened on a flagship Nvidia card since the 580. And
Are you
so
kidding me?
yeah, as reference. So like
Wow.
I think it's really useful as reference because basically a lot of the so I mean, of course, you'll have like your custom cards that will have like completely custom everything, custom PCB, custom cooler, and all that. But there's a lot of video cards. I know a lot of the kind of like lower end EVGAs, like the FTWs and stuff. Um, like they have like obviously a custom cooler, but they basically just use the reference PCB.
Yep.
So that would mean a lot of the aftermarket 1080 Ti's will by default not have the DVI as well. And I think that will, and Nvidia, I mean, because both Nvidia and AMD, like they've kind of dropped support for DVI-I, which is the version of DVI that supports the VGA passive analog adapters. So that's kind of gone by the wayside, and I think Nvidia is kind of signaling that they now feel that DVI, like regular DVI-D, is in the same position. Like it's just kind of time for it to go. So that
Agree.
yeah, it's about time. Also,
Yeah, I'll disagree with that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, for people who need DVI, it's a bummer. But I mean, it's like, I mean, you can kind of make the argument that Apple does this to like the detriment of their users, and you can kind of make the same argument here that there's still lots and lots of people. I mean, really, there's lots and lots of people using VGA. Like I see this all the
Myself
time,
included.
especially. Yeah, like especially secondary monitors. Like they want a second. They want to buy a new monitor, use the old monitor as a secondary monitor, and what do you know, the old one's VGA only or something. But like that's the
Just
beauty
get
of
Good.
well, yeah, HDMI to VGA, and then also that's the beauty of DisplayPort is you can do DisplayPort to VGA or HDMI or DVI or like it's just you can convert it to whatever you want. Which yeah, it's extra cost. Which in the case of the reference 1080 Ti, they are including a DisplayPort to DVI adapter. So, but like for anything else, like if you need more HDMI or VGA, then yeah, it's extra cost for adapters. But like that's the problem though, is like if you have a DVI adapter on the video card, like no matter how much money you spend on adapters, it's not going away unless you Dremel or solder the thing off. Um, so for SFF in particular, I mean I think it's a worthwhile sacrifice because otherwise it's just DVI is just a huge bulky connector, and for some inexplicable reason they insist on putting it on the second slot, which drives me nuts because you have this huge, I mean, relatively speaking, it's huge compared to really anything else. It's bigger than all the other normal video connectors. So you have it blocking off like half or 2/3 of the second slot. So and like Nvidia is bragging about it on the case of the 1080 Ti. It's like, hey, we got rid of it, and like, but it's a feature, not a bug, because now we have more exhaust area. And it really is true though. I mean, like if you look at pictures of the 1080 Ti reference, then like there's so much more like ventilation on the rear bracket compared to like other cards that have like the DVI port there.
It's very true.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at a photo right now, and it's it's not only that the I/O is up, but it's all like reasonably low profile. I mean, it's not like mini DisplayPort or whatever, but like the row is tied up against the PCB, and so you have basically 75% of the rear of the card is just ventilation.
And then yeah, I think they're talking how between that and then I think they're bragging about a new vapor chamber or something like that. So they're saying that the noise profile will be better than previous, like the Titan, and then like the 1080 founders, and then previous generations that the noise will be a lot better. It's still a blower card, so I mean it's not. I mean they're not breaking the laws of physics or anything. It's still going to be relatively noisy compared to like aftermarket cards with like big 92 millimeter fans and stuff, but should be an improvement. And then what I would like to see is, because I mean at the end of the day this is still a 220 watt TDP, I would love to see like that rear IO and then that vapor chamber cooler and then the new fan profile on like say like a reference 1070. I think that would be like with the lower TDP, I think that would be a very compelling like blower card. Especially if it could do like semi-fanless. then that would be awesome. Like, I think it would be a
I
really,
agree completely.
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, this one will be better, but it's still 220 watts. So there's only so much they can do, like once it's fully loaded, to kind of keep the noise down. Because it's still, like, no matter how fancy the vapor chamber or how vented the rear is, it's still a blower fan, so it's going to be loud.
Yeah. So just to go through the top length specs, I was able to pull up a spec sheet here. SM's 28, same as the Titan X. CUDA cores 3584, same as the Titan X. Where we have some differences, the memory data rate, it is 11 gigabits per second here. It is indeed 10 gigabits per second for the Titan X. For ROPs, some of these are disabled, 88 in the GTX 1080 Ti, 96 in the Titan X. And then L2 cache, this is where I was getting confused. It's a full 3 megs for the Titan X. They disable one of the modules of L2 cache in the Ti, so it's only 2,816 kilobytes. And then TDP is the same, 250 watts. For base clock, we just know that it's higher. I don't know how much higher, but in terms of performance characteristics, there's sort of a consistent single-digit percentage performance gain over the Titan X at base, or when you just sort of run it standard without any overclocking or other funny business. And then pretty much every other characteristic is identical to the Titan X, and that's just a product of the fact that it uses the exact same core. And then what else? Power, it's 1 8-pin, 1 6-pin. That's kind of standard at this point, at least on Nvidia's part. I think that's totally adequate, unless you want to overclock on nitrogen, in which case maybe not. But
Well, actually, like, that's the most they can do and still like be able to call it PCI Express certified. Because dual 8-pin is not, because that dual 8-pin would be what, 150, and then 75 from the slot.
It'd be 375.
Yeah, so that exceeds because 300 is the maximum officially for PCI Express 3.0. Rumor is 4.0 may increase the limit, but that's not here yet. So yeah, like anything with dual 8-pin, they can't technically say that it's PCIe SIG. They can't put like that PCIe SIG logo on it because it doesn't officially meet the spec.
Interesting. All right. Well, it does qualify for that. And then, of course, this leads us to perhaps the most important question: the price. Right? There are no bad products; there are just bad prices. So I personally was a bit nervous. I was kind of expecting something in like the $800, like $799. And that was mostly a function of the fact that you look at the 1070 and the 1080, right? And they have their price points, and they also have their price points if you get them with the Founders Edition card. And because of the fact that they pushed the cost of the cards up, and then on top of that, like with the Founders Edition, there was an additional cost associated with that. It's started to leave not so much room above those cards to place a 1080 Ti, and so the natural expectation will be that, well, that pricing will shift up too, and it'll be much closer to like $1,000 in price than it had been before. Obviously having the Titan X there leaves a certain ceiling, but I don't know. Like, for me, I was kind of surprised by what they eventually did, which was essentially two things. They brought out the 1080 Ti, and they said, okay, well, we're going to launch this at a $699 price point, call it $700. And then they also looked at the 1080 flat, non-Ti version, and they dropped the price of that. So they essentially took back some of that cost and gave themselves more room to essentially bisect between the 1080 and the Titan X with this 1080 Ti product, which does, in essence, what it's done in previous generations, which is to say, for gamers or anyone that isn't like really into just compute tasks, it kind of obviates any reason to get the Titan X at all. And it leads to, at least after the fact, after the adjustment, a seemingly nice lay of the land in terms of the lineup, and a good division between price points, but also the performance characteristics for its products. So I was curious as to what you guys were thinking and what your expectations were.
One thing I think is really, really interesting is that the 1080 Ti Founders is not any more than the MSRP for the cards.
Yes.
It's the same $700, which that puts Nvidia in a really weird position, because previously, the founders editions for the 1070 and 1080 were $100 over MSRP. So like, yeah, Nvidia is selling video cards directly, so they're competing with their customers, which is usually a big no-no. Just kind of in general for business, is like if you're selling like products to other companies who use your product and their products, like yours is just a small component of a larger thing, like turning around and then like also selling the full product and competing with your customers, it's not usually good business. So like they kind of like got around it by selling it $100 more. But I think maybe the reason this is happening is that, like, rather than having like that big price gap to kind of say like, hey, we are selling it direct just so we can offer like our own reference version kind of throughout the lifetime of the product. But I think what happened is a lot of the add-in board companies like just kind of took that as an excuse to jack up prices of theirs. It's like, hey, ours is like 650 instead of 600 or whatever, but it's still cheaper than the founders, right? Rather than having like maintaining like the $100 difference, they kind of just crept into that. So I'm wondering if like Nvidia doing the 1080 Ti founders at MSRP price is kind of a retaliation, I guess, for that, for the add-in board companies for jacking up prices. Because I mean, it profits the add-in board companies, and add-in board vendors would be like MSI and EVGA and Asus and all them people. That's what those are for people who aren't familiar with the term. It increases their profits, but I'm assuming that they're buying the actual GPUs from Nvidia for the same price. So Nvidia, I think, is like it's kind of like the whole like just calculus where like the add-in board vendors are probably moving less units, but they're making more profit because they're selling them for higher. But Nvidia is just seeing less money because like units are moving and they're selling the chips at the same prices to the add-in board vendors. So I'm kind of curious if the 1080 Ti founders selling at MSRP is retaliation for that. It's like, if you guys are going to play that game, we're just going to screw you over. So now like it like now they don't have a excuse to sell the cards over MSRP. Like if it's going to be more than $700, it better offer something more impressive, like cooling or overclocking or whatever, over the founders. So yeah, I'm curious what all kind of prompted this decision, because it's a very interesting move compared to the previous founders.
That is a very interesting dynamic and awesome analysis of it. I really hadn't thought about it in that way before, but it may have been just an unintended consequence of their previous decision with the 1070 and the 1080 to have this division of pricing where you have to pay a premium to get the quote unquote founders edition shrouds, right? Like they may have accidentally invited board partners to do things that maximize their own income, but pushed or put pressure on volume in a way that hurt Nvidia in the long run, even if they are making some money off of these founder edition cards. I wonder how many of those they even sold, though. Like, I don't like. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I feel like most of them must have gone to like people that were
I don't pay a whole lot of attention
stuff,
since like they're all fairly large cards. But I mean, you think like system integrators. So like the system integrators, it'd be like the Origin PC and Falcon Northwest and Main Gear type companies of the world. They typically prefer they typically prefer reference cards because it's easier to do for both for like cooling. It's kind of more predictable since it just exhausts right out the back. But also like, I don't know if people notice, but like the reference NVIDIA cards have screw holes on the front edge of the cards, which are used typically for mounting brackets to secure their cards, which like most cases don't have anything that mounts to it. So most people don't even realize those holes exist. But like a lot of OEM machines make use of them for shipping purposes. That way, because I mean, the video card's a big, heavy component that's just kind of hanging off the PCI Express slot. And then I'm sure we've all seen videos on YouTube of FedEx and UPS and all of them just kind of chucking boxes around. So it makes a lot of sense for like people like Dell and other like Dell and stuff who are shipping in huge volumes, and then also like smaller system integrators who can't afford to just kind of write off like the $100 or like $500, $600, $700 video card. Um, so it makes a lot of sense for them to secure it. So like a lot of those companies like the reference cards. So I suspect they've sold quite a few just to those type of people. Maybe not necessarily to like the retail channel, but like direct to customers. But I imagine they've sold quite a bit.
They're sold enough to continue doing
Yeah, I
that.
would imagine so.
Yeah.
No kidding. All right. Well, anything else to talk about here before we move on to the favorite forum thread of the week episode, whatever we call it nowadays?
Fortnite.
Doesn't have the meandering name.
I guess
Fortnite.
it's like,
Thank you.
yeah, the 1080 Ti. I mean, it's really cool, like not having DVI and vapor chamber and all that. But at the end of the day, it's still like your normal Nvidia 10.5-inch card. So like, to me, like I wasn't really that interested because I'm really waiting for HBM2 so we can see some like really short cards again. Because it's the Fury X and the Nano have came out a while ago, and it's I'm ready for new ones. Something more power efficient mainly, because like the Nano is super cool. Well, it's super cool as in like it's a neat product, but it's relatively speaking, it's rather power hungry, and thus
Yes.
heat's not a huge issue. Because like the problem is the power is it has very transient spikes. So like it will like average power consumption and thus average heat output is very reasonable, but like just because of the way the power management is done, it will spike up, and that causes a lot of issues for DC-DC type setups. So like people have done a lot of experimentation on SFF forum about it, and it's just like the conclusion we've kind of come to is that the Nano and DC-DC just don't work.
No.
Like it's just, unless you get like one of those big industrial like Meanwell bricks, which is not particularly SFF, like it doesn't play nice. It just doesn't play nice with like your normal, like your kind of more reasonably sized AC/DC bricks. So like I'm really, that's why I was really disappointed with the Vega announcement. I mean, it is what it is, and like I recognize that I expected too much of it, but I really want to see like a successor to the Nano, and like the 1080 Ti as like cool as interesting as it is for like certain features and like especially like performance. I mean, it's indisputably, I think, the highest performing gaming card currently out, or it will be out soon. Speaking of which, I think it launches March 10th. I don't think we mentioned that yet, but I mean, to me for SFF, it's just now that we know that something like the Nano is possible, and not just the Nano, but even like the GTX 1080 Mini from Zotac, that we will hopefully have a review posted soon. Like now that we've seen what's possible, like the 1080 Ti, and like I don't think we'll ever see a really short version of it, because like it's not HBM2, so like it's got all your discrete memory chips, and then they're higher clocked. So I'm suspecting that's going to put a limitation on like how much the vendors will be able to kind of fiddle with the arrangement. So I don't think we'll really be able to see them compact it. And then it's a higher TDP, so they'll be limited in how much they can kind of reduce the footprint of the VRM, like Zotac did on the 1080 Mini. So it's an interesting card. It's high performance, but like for SFF, especially people pushing the boundaries in either case volume or like using DC-DC, I think it'd be prudent to hold out for Vega whenever that launches. Yeah,
I agree. All right, and with that, I think we can wrap things up and move along to the forum thread of the fortnight, which is also another interesting thing, and we're actually going to rewind a bit and go back to the topic of Ryzen. Now, of course, you have a new architecture, you have CPUs that are out, but everything's new. What else do you need? You need a new motherboard. And so per usual, it's a bit of a struggle, to say the least, to find motherboards of a certain form factor that will fit into most of these sorts of enclosures that we're interested in. But this was a thread started by Mark Paris called Incoming AM4 Mini ITX. And it has to do with an unveiling by BioStar of the first AM4 Mini ITX, the X370 GTN. And he originally posted this in late January, so this has been an ongoing thread for about a month. We're excited just because it might even still be the first Mini ITX board, period.
Yeah, it's the only one we know of.
Yep.
Yeah, that has the X370. So you guys have probably actually read through the whole thing. I've only skimmed it. There are some photos of the board itself. I don't know how much we know in terms of like specs for it. I mean, you don't really need to know much more than that. Just to know it can work. But
it's not been officially launched. Like when the thread started, like I think Mark Paris noticed a like there was a spec sheet, like no pictures or anything, just a spec sheet. And then like I think yesterday we saw some actual pictures. It's still not like officially released yet. There hasn't been like a press release or anything like that. But we saw some pictures of the actual board. So it's not just a like in development thing. It's like it's something that exists and will presumably be released relatively soon. But yeah, we still don't know a ton of stuff about it, just because like we don't have any really like official information. But yeah, it's definitely the first ITX Ryzen board we know of on the AM4 platform. It feature set is pretty decent. I mean, it's got M.2, like 2 DDR4 slots as usual, couple SATA ports, USB 3.0 header. Like decent looks. It's not. I mean, it doesn't look bad. It's black PCB, black slots. Other than on the pictures we see, the AM4 socket itself is white. So I don't know whether that's what it's going to be, or if this is because it's a pre-production sample, or if that's just like there aren't any like black sockets available yet.
You're not going to see it in a build anyway.
Yeah, yes, and that's the thing is like you're not going to see it, and like so it actually looks pretty good.
Yeah, it does. Given that it anyway.
the VRM section looks kind of I mean, it's not horrible.
It's not an overclocking board.
Special. Yeah, it's not anything.
It's only got a 4-pin power for the CPU.
Yeah, and then no wireless, which is I don't know, kind of a bummer, I guess.
The integrated wireless that come with a lot of the boards is pretty mediocre anyway.
Well, like there's not even a slot though, so like like the integrated wireless usually isn't very good, but at least there's a slot, so you could swap it out with something better later. But here, there's not even a slot.
Yeah, how much is a USB dongle?
Time for a USB dongle.
Yeah,
yeah, but now you're giving up a USB port, which from the looks of it, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 6 total.
2 USB 3.1, 6 USB 3, and 2 USB 2.
Yeah, but I think some of those are that's including the headers though, I believe. So like I'm like the diagram, I'm not sure. I guess the first number is header, so that means there's 4 3.0 on the rear, no 2.0 on the rear. The only 2.0 I think is the header. And then the 3.1, one of them's a Type C. So unless you're one of the few people who actually owns a Type C peripheral, that means you're either going to need an adapter, or you won't be able to use it. So kind of at the low end, you basically have 5 USB ports on the back. And then if you're using one for a USB adapter or a wireless adapter, then really you only have 4 left. So I'd rather there be a slot. Just that'd be my preference. And then the M.2, the M.2 is weird. I'm not sure what's up with the picture, because like if you look at the picture on the motherboard, you can kind of see there's 2 standoffs in the lower left for the M.2, which you would think would be on the rear side of the motherboard, but it looks like the standoffs are kind of installed on the top side, and then like the screw is on the top side, but then like the slot's nowhere to be seen. So I'm not sure what's up with that. If they just for some reason installed the standoffs and the screw on the top side, even though it's actually supposed to be on the bottom side, or I don't know. Like, I'm not sure what's going on there. That's kind of weird. But other than that, it looks pretty decent. I mean, it's a BioStar, so make of that what you will. They're not exactly kind of regarded in the
They're not top tier.
Yeah, which, I mean, it remains to be seen. They've kind of made an effort to turn things around, though. Like with the racing kind of motif, I'm not a big fan of.
It's very thankfully it's quite subtle on this board though.
Yeah, like on some of the other boards, it's kind of gaudy.
Yeah.
But here, it's like really, there's not almost any accent to
just
be
the
seen.
carbon fiber sticker on the piece of aluminium on the chipset.
Yeah, on the VRM and then the chipset, which is actually fairly well done if the pictures are to be believed. The VRM section I wish was a little bit beefier, but I mean, yeah, it's like you said, this isn't really an overclocking board, so I don't know. Be curious if it kind of stands up to scrutiny since it's the only one.
Kind of need to know price point to really judge.
Yeah, I mean it's BioStar, so they can't exactly command a premium. Like they just won't be able to get away with it. I mean, other than then again, it's the only ITX one board currently available, so I don't know. But I'm curious now, like where's the others? Because Drew, when he was talking to AMD at CES, they told him that there were 3 companies developing ITX, which they didn't really give him any indication when they would release. And I believe in the Reddit AMA is that they said that ITX, I think they reiterated that like whenever the vendors, motherboard vendors want to release it, they're ready. They're not holding back ITX for any reason. It's like whenever motherboard vendors are ready to release them, they can. So I'm curious, like there's been a lot of speculation on who the other 2 companies are, and like I think all the major players we've talked to kind of like denied it being them. So I'm pretty sure Asus, Ace Rock,
MSI,
and I think Gigabyte have all denied it.
Yeah.
So
we're kind of left with
BioStar's one,
ECS.
so that really only leaves ECS, and then maybe one of the oddballs like Zotac or Foxconn. But
Maxsun.
Yeah,
there's a Chinese brand named Maxsun who's doing some AM4 boards, and they look relatively okay. So I'm wondering if they're going to be it.
Yeah, so I mean the thing is like more than likely if any of them release one, it's going to be like this. It'll be fairly basic. It's not going to be like a overclocker's dream or anything like that. So we'll see. I'm really curious. I like more than anything, I would love to see a high-end ITX board for Ryzen, because like I think that would really up the I think people, once they see you can do 8-core 16-thread for like relatively affordable in ITX, I think that will really raise the like kind of SFF creds.
We need another was it the M4 A88 Ti Deluxe?
Yes.
We need one of those.
Yeah, because that, I mean, if you kind of look at, I mean, it'll be a lot easier to, because that board is really interesting because it resorted to SODIMM, which
they had no choice.
Yeah, they really didn't, because they had, back then you had both the North Bridge and the South Bridge, which in the case of AM4 is not, there's no North Bridge anymore. It's just the chipset. And even the chipset is like, it's there, but it's not really used for much anymore, because like the, it's basically only there if you need just extra ports. Because like
it's basically a South Bridge now.
Well, not even. Well, it's like a partial South Bridge, because like the AM4 processors have some USB, some SATA built in. So like theoretically, I think you don't need a chipset other than maybe just like, I guess maybe you need it for just like the basic, like the I forget what it's called, but like the controller for like the fans and stuff like that, and just the power. Yeah, the power management. Which I think that's still a separate chip anyway. At least it is on Intel processors. It's like it's not part of the
I'm not
PCH.
100% on that. Yeah, I'm not 100% on that.
So like I think theoretically, and I think I'm wondering if maybe like because like a lot of people have speculated about like the X300 chipset, which AMD's marketing slide specifically pointed out as being for SFF. So I'm wondering if that's like a pseudo chipset where it's like it's not really used for anything other than just be there kind of.
It's
For
enough to
marketing.
trigger everything to work.
Yeah, because like on an ITX board, you have less need of all the extra ports. Like you don't need as many. Like you're not going to fit. Well, I guess you could, but like you're not going to do like multiple USB 3 headers on an ITX board like you see on some like ATX boards. There just isn't really room for it. And then same thing with like you're not going to put like 8 SATA ports, or there's less need for it anyway. So I'm wondering if that's what those chipsets are aimed for. It's not so much that like, I mean, obviously BioStar's done it, so it's not that X370 is not doable on ITX. It's just that there's less need for extra ports, so it makes more sense to use like a very stripped down chipset for like low end ITX boards or something like that.
I wonder if the 300 chipset's low enough wattage that you could just slap it on the back of the motherboard. If it's doing nothing, it shouldn't be putting out too much heat.
Well, like the Intel PCHs don't really need heat sinks. They just kind of put it on there just for looks.
Because there are people think it's a cheap board.
I forget where I saw it. I think maybe Asus or like Raja at Asus mentioned it. I don't know if it was in an article somewhere or if he specifically told it to Drew. I can't remember. But I think he said that like they don't need to put a PCH heatsink on it, but if they don't, people will think it's like a cheap board and they won't buy it.
Yeah.
So it's like it's almost purely marketing. And like the AM4 chipsets, because like they really don't do much, I think that's even more so the case with AM4.
Well, you look at the one on this BioStar board, it's flat with a sticker on top.
Yeah, it's pretty
It'll
anemic,
literally be a little sheet of aluminium.
Yeah, it probably is. You can't really tell from the pictures since we don't have one at a real good steep angle.
No, it's definitely flat though.
So yeah, this will make it a lot easier to do a high-end AM4 ITX board though, because like you don't have to deal with both the North Bridge and the South Bridge. You'll just have this kind of small chipset. Like of course there's like the problem with the socket itself is kind of awkward compared to Intel standard mountings, since it's kind of like not as bad as AM3, but it is still very rectangular, which makes it a little more difficult to do like coolers on it compared to Intel's like square pattern. But yeah, I really would like to see like a Ryzen impact board would be amazing. Yeah, like just a beefy daughter board for the VRM to kind of save room for the bigger socket.
Yeah, so it's kind of a blend of that was it Z77 board and the M488 board.
Yeah, so
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Though the problem is like any really high-end ITX board like that would easily be like 6 months to a year out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like all the vendors I think told Drew that because I mean a high-end ITX, like ITX in general requires more engineering investment, and then a high-end ITX board requires even more. And then you have all this like R&D invested in a board that in the end will not sell nearly as many units as like a relatively like a ATX board, which would have required a fraction of the resources to develop. So it's kind of a double whammy. Like you spend more developing it and you're going to sell less units. And then like you can't price it that high because people just have this kind of perception that like ITX is like a lesser form factor. And so like it can't command a price premium that like a high-end ATX board would. So it's just, they're kind of like backed into a corner. So yeah. So like a lot of the vendors told us that like they're not going to do a high-end ITX board or even ITX at all until they see that Ryzen is commercially successful, which by all accounts it is so far. Like pre-orders are kind of like sold out in a lot of places. So
I think Ryzen 5 will be a much better leading indicator of that, though.
Yeah,
Like
mid
I
range.
think in volume
But I
terms,
mean,
that price
people
point
are
and
buying this many of like what is ostensibly like the high end, like because I mean 330. I mean, compared to like the 8-core Intel, yes, it's really cheap, but I mean, compared to most of the market, it's still an expensive processor.
yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
But I mean, so that considering that a 330 or even like the 1800X seems to be selling well, and that's a $500 chip, I think that bodes well for the commercial success of Ryzen. So hopefully the Asus and MSI and Gigabyte and Ace Rock, I can't forget them. So hopefully they've all been impressed. But yeah, the problem is even if they have been incredibly impressed with the commercial performance of Ryzen, is like we're still going to be talking 6 months to a year if they've just started development now. So it's and that's kind of like the problem with Ryzen is that the chip itself, by all accounts, is a great processor, especially if you're kind of like me and you're more into like kind of more workstation-y type things than you are just strictly gaming. But it's like there's like the BioStar is like it's an okay board, at least from appearances, but we probably won't see any great boards for ITX for months, possibly a year. So that kind of dampens my enthusiasm for Ryzen, at least for now.
Yeah. And with that positive note, is there anything else you guys want to discuss before we wrap up, or?
Just the usual. Follow us on our social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Links are at the bottom of the our main website.
All right. And how about you, James?
I guess I won't be here for definitely the next episode and possibly the episode after that. So
That's all right. I've got a guest lined up for the next podcast.
oh,
Ooh,
that'd be interesting.
Ooh, a little foreshadowing.
I won't be able to
wow.
listen, but I won't be able to listen live, so I'll just have to catch it after the fact. But yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll have to. It'll be fun listening to a podcast, like just purely listening, because like I think I've been in every one except I think maybe one episode I wasn't. So it'll be interesting like listening to one instead of like being in it, because I don't get to do that very often. Yeah.
So, is that what we sound like?
I
know
do that
what,
with my voice all the time.
because we do the YouTube thing now, but I used to edit them. Like I edited the backlog, so I've kind of become immune to that. It's like, whatever. Like, I've had to listen to myself talk for hours on end editing, so I've gotten used to it.
Oh man. All right. Well, on that note, I'll have to wrap things up. Thank you to all of our listeners and folks that were able to listen live or are listening now after the fact. As James mentioned, he won't be here next episode, but as John mentioned, we will have a guest.
Assuming I can schedule it.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. We'll share the details of our next episode.
Yeah.
But we're looking forward to it. And thanks again for listening. And we will see you next episode.